Welcome to the Mindfulness Academy Podcast. I'm your host, Amy Morgan. And on today's show, we have Dr. Gail Gazelle. Hi, Gail.
Hi there, Amy. A pleasure to be here today.
It's a pleasure to have you. I want to tell everyone a little bit about you so they understand who exactly is on our show today. Dr. Gazelle is a former hospice physician, part-time Harvard Medical School assistant professor, master certified coach for physicians, and mindfulness meditation teacher. Over the past decade, she has coached over 500 physicians and physician leaders. She is the author of the 2023 Mindful MD, 6 Ways Mindfulness Restores Your Autonomy and Cures Healthcare Burnout. Download your free chapter at gailgazelle.com/mindfulmd. She is also the author of the 2020 Everyday Resilience, a practical guide to build inner strength and weather life's challenges, and the 2013 Harvard Health Guide, Mindfulness Support for Alzheimer's Caregivers. Dr. Gazelle's work has been featured in as diverse venues as the New England Journal of Medicine, CNN, Medical Economics, and, the Oprah magazine. Find out more at gailgazelle.com. Wow, you've had quite an impressive life here, and I'm excited to talk with you about how it has transpired to where you are today, which the timing of what you're doing and the service that you're providing is just beautiful. I've been so enjoying learning about it and am so excited to share it with our listeners. I know that folks who are physicians or not, will gain a lot from what you have to say about, I would say in particular, burnout and resilience. I think those are the two things that kind of keep popping up for me as I read through your work, including your book, Mindful MD, which is wonderful, available on Amazon and a lot of online platforms, right? Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to hop right in as you are a first for the Mindfulness Academy podcast, in which you're not someone that I know like in the flesh, in person. We've not met in person before or had that kind of connection. And you reached out to me online, which I'm so grateful you did, because your work is very important and needs to be shared. So I'm honored to have the opportunity to help be a little part of that. So thank you for reaching out, Gail. I wanted to start, see if we could get a little bit about you. Would you mind telling me a little bit about where you grew up and your educational and personal background?
Sure. Well, we'll roll the clock back just a few years. The first part of my growing up was in Long Island, New York, outside of New York City. And I grew up in a middle-class family that looked very normal and vanilla from the outside. And yet on the inside, unfortunately, there was a lot of abuse. My parents, I've come to understand, were wounded from their own battles in their childhoods and growing up, and hadn't really healed their wounds. So, acted out some things with their children. And as hard as that was, it, in many ways, I think, shaped who I have become and really set me on a trajectory of wanting very much to help others heal, whether that was medically, whether that was emotionally, whether that was spiritually. And as I moved along in my education, I found myself volunteering in a hospice when I was an undergrad at Cornell. And there was something about individuals being at the end of their lives that really just called to me. And I didn't fully understand why at the time. I understand now that because what happened in my childhood left me feeling very alone and isolated and unseen and unheard, there was a part of me that wanted to help individuals and connected somehow with the isolation that many people experience at the end of their lives. You have to remember, I'm white haired, I've been on the earth a while. Palliative care wasn't a field when I went to college and medical school, and yet that's what really spoke to me. So I went to medical school with the express purpose of working with individuals at the end of their life. And that's what I did for most of my clinical career.
That's an interesting connection between feeling alone in your own life and seeing that in those who are near the end of their days. It's interesting how folks get connected to their life's passion when there's a human connection. You talk a lot about compassion in your book, and it sounds like that was very much so alive in you.
Yes, I think outwardly so, and somewhere in my psyche was
Yeah.
driving me in unseen ways. And yet, we all have difficulties in our lives, whether it's abuse or, accidents or premature deaths or financial difficulties. And that can often drive us in terms of paying it forward, in a sense, how we want to help others so that they don't have to experience, or that they're at least not as alone with whatever difficulties they're experiencing.
Absolutely embrace the humanness in our shared experience.
Mm.
Absolutely. So this is that really the gist of what attracted you to a medical career?
Yeah, initially, that's what drove me, and what was an incredibly fulfilling and sacred part of my career as a physician. I did a lot of home visits as a hospice doc, and it's really something when you go into a patient's home and you're there and you're sitting by the bedside or in their living room or their kitchen. It's in many ways the opposite of the chemotherapy suite, for example. And individuals feel so much more empowered to share what's really going on. And there's a lot going on for people near the end of life. So it had so much meaning, so much richness. I would leave a patient's home and I would think to myself, and I get paid for this, because it was such meaningful work. So I did that
Mm.
for many years in my clinical career. And then we were beginning to understand more about burnout in healthcare. So this is well before the pandemic. This is 15 plus years ago. I'd had my own journey with burnout. I was busy in my academic and clinical career. I was raising a son on my own. And I never felt like I was good enough anywhere. At Harvard, I'm here at Harvard Medical School. I wondered, well, why aren't they kicking me out? I'm not as good as other doctors. And then, when I was home with my son, I would feel guilty that I wasn't doing more for my patients and my career. When I was busy in my career, I'd feel guilty that I wasn't doing more for my son. And it was really tearing me apart. I stumbled into coaching, actually, and I'd had many years of therapy to, help resolve the wounds of my family life. But coaching was kind of like leapfrogging forward. There were things I thought I would go to my grave with that all of a sudden kind of shifted. And so that's when I pivoted in my career about 15 years ago and became a coach, again with the express purpose of helping another vulnerable population, which is physicians in the modern healthcare environment. So that's what I've had the pleasure of doing in this second phase of my career.
Oh my goodness. And hundreds of physicians you have helped. I'm curious, uh, is this a nationwide coaching program, or do you try to stick to a certain part of the nation, or even is it beyond our borders?
Right. Well, there's so much distress in healthcare, and there's so many physicians struggling to fit into the corporate structure, which is now the beat in healthcare. And they're also struggling with all the demands, the care and feeding of the electronic health record, haggling with insurance companies to get needed tests for their patients, spending hours, on what we could call below grade tasks. So the need is mighty. So I now have a team of physician coaches that work with me, 6 coaches that work with me. And we help physicians, physician leaders, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, nursing leaders, really across North America. I have had clients in other continents, but we're pretty much North America based.
Excellent. Excellent. You alluded to this earlier, but I'm curious at this stage in your career, you are a Harvard faculty member, a coach, a speaker, an author, and the list goes on and on and on. You're not shedding things. It feels like maybe you're even putting more onto your plate because how old is your son at this point?
My son is 27,
So it's
and
still a mom.
yes, he actually works in what we now call the family business, which is the coaching practice.
Oh, how special is that? How special is that? I'm curious about how you manage these various roles, and avoid burnout in your own life, which I know can be pretty stressful for someone who's in a coaching role to take that on top of kind of absorbing sometimes what can feel like other folks' struggles. It's sometimes hard to do that. So I'm curious about that, kind of how you manage all of these hats that are on top of your head. But also, I'm curious what's giving you the most joy right now.
Mm. Those are great questions, Amy. Well, many of us juggle different hats, don't we? Parenting, caring for elders who may be, struggling medically, financial burdens, multiple jobs. So I don't think I'm unique in that way. Hopefully, we can find a place that we're working, a vocation that's meaningful for us, and that we can focus on that meaning. I think all jobs have meaning. For me, as I said, the earlier part of my career working in end-of-life care was so sacred that it just filled me up, having these kind of connections with people in such a vulnerable place. And I would say that's equally true now because however physicians appear to the general public, they can seem kind of invincible and they're so smart and they're economically, secure. It's really interesting what happens in our medical training. It's a very fear-based process that we go through where we're always being measured and compared to others. The focus isn't on what we're doing well. The focus is always on our deficits and our weaknesses. Oh, yeah, you were good at that, but you didn't know this one detail about the patient's case. And I'm going to kind of rub your nose in that. There's a lot of that that goes on in medical training. And furthermore, we're taught that we're this invulnerable captain of the healthcare team, the all-knowing paragon, and that we have to have the right answer, even, let's say, in the early parts of a global pandemic when there are no right answers. So for me, coming back to your question, there's so much meaning in helping vulnerable people. And
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
physicians are in the current healthcare system. What's important, though, as you draw attention to, is that we have things that feed us, both professionally and personally. And you and I were talking before the podcast came on that we're both big pickleball players. So pickleball just totally floats my boat. I, played this morning. I play typically 2 to 4 times a week. It's a great outlet for me. I also have a beautiful canine pal, and we can be found out in nature many days a week. So those are things that fuel me in addition to really the richness of the career that I'm very fortunate to have.
I love that. And I love the balance between life and work and life outside of work. And pickleball is the best. If you haven't tried it, listeners, give it a whirl. I liken it to table tennis, but you're kind of on the table. It's just incredible fun. Incredible fun.
Great combination of a competitive sport and a lot of playfulness.
Yeah, playfulness. I like that word for that. I'm curious who your typical client is. So you talked about physicians in North America. Is there anything else you're kind of looking for?
Mm.
Maybe even symptoms, as folks are kind of coming to you or complaints?
Well, very tragically, there is a lot of burnout in healthcare. Doctors, nurses, therapists, technicians, really everybody working in the healthcare endeavor. There's probably the most literature about physician burnout. And what we see is that 1 in 2 physicians are struggling with burnout. And what does that mean? Well, it means that they've lost their connection to taking care of others. They've lost their sense of meaning and purpose. It's almost like the well is dry. And it's very disabling for those that suffer with burnout in healthcare and beyond, because it leaves you questioning, well, why am I doing what I'm doing? I'm not making a difference anyway. Why bother? And that's a terrible thing in healthcare. We need healthcare providers who will go to the ends of the earth for us when we're sick or one of our loved ones is sick. That's the social contract. And yet the level of burnout is very high. So many of the physicians that my team and I coach are struggling with burnout. Many of them also want to move into leadership positions or are having interpersonal challenges, not getting along, not necessarily with their team, but with the layer of non-clinical administrators who now have a very major role in our healthcare system and decide things like whether we're going to have Purell in an exam room and how many patients we have to see, for example. So that's a lot of who we are helping. And I'm really happy to say that I have a lot of testimonials on my site, gailgazelle.com, and I encourage anyone who's interested to take a look at those because we're really in the business of transforming lives. That's what we do in healthcare. We transform the lives of a burnt out healthcare professional, physician, nurse, leader, etc., really reclaim their sense of meaning, reclaim their sense of purpose, find that balance that is so critically important despite whatever is going on, because there's a lot that's very challenging in healthcare. And really, our motto is that we help healthcare professionals realize that they don't have to hand over their happiness and career satisfaction to a dysfunctional healthcare system. They don't, unless they choose to. And that's the autonomy that we in coaching help healthcare professionals restore. And it's really exciting to help individuals in that way because we're not only helping them, but there's a tremendous ripple effect to everybody that they're working with, to their patients, to their families, and to society at large. So it's, again, deeply meaningful work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm wondering if there are kind of these symptoms, how burnout manifests. I don't know if it's different than in how it is for a normal human being. I mean, I heard some of those, the monologue that may be going on. I don't want to put up with this. And I saw some of those even in your book, Mindful MD. I didn't go to medical school for this. I can't wait to retire, the things. Um,
Yes.
are those kind of the symptoms, or are there other things? I mean, I'm sure it probably even manifests physically.
Hmm. The main symptoms and how we can recognize if we're heading toward burnout is that there's a loss of emotional energy. So, what does that mean? Well, emotions, like you just don't have it in you to care in the same way, to invest in the same way. It's kind of a shutdown. It's a lack of engagement, really, that we could think about. There's a cynicism that goes along with it. Again, I'm not doing any good, so why should I even try? And then that deep disconnection from our sense of meaning, purpose, and accomplishment. So many of the physicians that come to me and my team with burnout will say, nothing's going well. I'm not doing anything meaningful. And I'll be very empathetic because that's a very painful place to be in one's career. And then I'll say, so, Dr. Jones, if you look back over the last week, just tell me, one high point of a patient that you interacted with. Usually there's a pause because the negativity bias of the brain is pulling that poor doctor to all the things that didn't go well and all the complicated patient interactions. And then I challenge them further, and all of a sudden their face softens and they tell me about a patient that they connected with. And maybe it was an elderly patient with some advanced disease that they really can't impact at this point. And yet they were there for that patient. They listened, they were present, they showed that they cared. And as they're telling me about this positive interaction, you can see their whole demeanor changes, their shoulders drop. You asked about the physical impact. We hold a lot in our bodies. That doc was kind of sitting there like this. And as they're telling me about the positive interaction, there's a little bit of a smile on their face. And so this isn't sort of a Pollyanna, everything's wonderful, but let's be realists here. Mindfulness is all about reality. It's about seeing reality more clearly. It's not so much about, sitting on a mountaintop meditating. It's about working with the instrument that all human beings work in all of our hours, which is this one between the two human ears. So I'm helping in that case, the physician see the true reality, which of course there are negative things. Of course, there are difficulties in the practice of medicine, and there are wonderful things. So let's shift the balance to reality. Because when we're in burnout, it's almost as if we have blinders on. All we see is what is not going well. And we have to help people with burnout really move those blinders, realize that they have them on, and move them out of the way.
Yeah, I like that physical or that visual that you give with the blinders, because I know it can feel that way if you just start feeling super overwhelmed. That
Yes.
negativity bias becomes really the full picture of life for you. I'm wondering if you would tell us a little bit about your approach. and how you
Mhm.
help the clients. Maybe what folks could expect when they come to you. And before you answer that, I actually had a quick question in between, which was, do you work with individual physicians or physician groups or a little bit of both?
Definitely a little bit of both. Many physicians come to us for, they've heard about me, word of mouth. And then we have many engagements with an organization that wants to support its people. So I think both of those are really important. You asked about the approach. Well, the approach is a strengths-based, non-punitive approach. It's a growth mindset approach. So let me just share one vignette, if I could, Amy, from the
Sure.
book, which is a thoracic surgeon who I call Brian, who came to coaching after getting feedback that he was perceived by nurses as being very curt, rude, and condescending. And you might have an image of a surgeon that comes to mind with that description, kind of a command and control man, who is not always helpful and kind to those he works with. And obviously, this crosses gender lines. Um, but Brian was, on the one hand, surprised by this feedback, but he also didn't take it very seriously. He kind of was like, well, what do they know? I'm doing so much good for my hospital, and they're just a bunch of wusses anyway. So it was very interesting coaching him because his approach was, it's not me. I'm doing great. I bring so much value to my hospital and to my patients. It doesn't really matter what anybody else thinks. Well, the good news is that Brian was open to learning. And many of us, physicians, nurses, and others in healthcare, we love to learn. We're very, we thrive on that. So it's wonderful being able to coach someone like Brian. And I asked Brian a little bit about what was going on in his own mind. How did he interact with other people? How did he view the other members of the healthcare team? How did he view himself and his role? So I charged him to keep an eye on his thoughts and really get to know his own thought processes. And we were meeting again in 2 weeks' time, and he was charged with reporting back to me in 2 weeks. Well, it didn't take him 2 weeks. He called me after 3 days and he said to me, Gail, I had no idea what was going on in my own mind. It's like a crazy town up there. There's just a zillion thoughts about everything. I had no idea. So that's one part of the approach. So, in other words, there's so many stresses that a surgeon like Brian faces. We can't change those by and large, but we can change how we relate to those circumstances. And that's the autonomy that I talk about in Mindful MD and the 6 ways that I believe mindfulness restores autonomy and actually cures healthcare burnout. So Brian, once he could see what was going on in his own mind, he began to see the autonomy that he could exercise, the choice that he had about what he was going to do with all these thoughts that his mind was so busy producing. Was he going to kind of hang on to them and believe each and every one? Or was he going to begin to see, well, which of my thoughts are helpful and which ones are not helpful? Which ones are contributing to this negative view that people have of me? Because as he thought about it more, and part of our work was around helping ground him and align with his own values, he began to see that he wanted people to like him. He wanted people to see him at his best, which was not rude, curt, and condescending. He's a much better person than that. And I shone a light on that better version of Brian to kind of guide him there. But this began a process around mindfulness where he became the master of his mind rather than the captive, rather than believing every single thought that came into his mind and not just believing them, but acting on them, which was getting him in trouble, to actually realizing, well, how do I want to relate to these thoughts? So that's the approach. It's not that I sit here and tell busy doctors who have no time to sit and meditate. I recommend meditation to very few of my clients, but I do help them restore that autonomy, the autonomy that can't be taken from us, which is the autonomy over ourselves, our responses, and how we interact with this instrument that we're all using.
Oh, I hear a lot of mindfulness modalities kind of sprinkled within without saying, hey, sit down and meditate right now. I think when you and I had an introductory call, you said something about how physicians needed to be shown mindfulness, not told. And I loved that. I loved that because, and it might have been with you, I was talking about this, but when you just tell someone to add something else to their already insanely busy schedule, it can feel burdensome, frustrating. It might even turn people off completely to it, whether they're a physician or a working parent. So I love that that's what you're doing. I'm wondering. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Really, really designed for the adult learner. And we adults don't learn by somebody telling us things. We learn by kind of having aha moments about our own lives.
Yeah,
And so that's exactly what you're talking about. I'm not here to say, oh, be more mindful and go meditate and life will be great. I'm here to help my clients, like the Brian vignette illustrates, um, helping them see ways that they can do things differently and helping them see what's in it for them to do so. We only change when we're motivated, when we see what's in it for us. So that's my job as a coach.
absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. I'm wondering if at this juncture, if we could hop down into mindfulness in particular. I'm curious if you would tell us what your definition of mindfulness is.
Mm. Well, mindfulness is a form of mind training where we are becoming aware of what's going on in our own mind. In other words, our thought processes. And we're not just becoming aware, but once we are aware of what's actually here, rather than the thought process that the mind is busy telling us about what's actually here, we can see the choice points that we have. In other words, we can regulate ourselves. So it's awareness and action. Both of those things are part of mindfulness. A more traditional definition is it's the awareness that emerges when we pay attention to what's actually here in the present moment. And we do so with less judgment than our mind is typically bringing to situations. So I love that definition, but it's in the service of having greater autonomy over our own mental processes and how we relate to them and how we relate to the circumstances that we find ourselves in.
It reminds me of one of the quotes. You have a ton of great quotes in your book, by the way. Anytime you can get Pema Chodron in there, big fan. But there, and I don't remember who this was attributed to, and I'm not going to quote it perfectly, I'm sure, but the concept was that the mind is a fantastic servant, but a terrible dictator, or a terrible leader, something like that. So
Master.
the master, yes, the terrible master, because we need to be in control of what's going on. It is seriously mind-boggling how many thoughts can go through even just my mind, just speaking personally, in 60 seconds. And you think, no wonder I burn out. There's somebody running through my brain at 100 miles an hour all day long. And if I find that if I don't take time to recognize what my brain is telling me, it will run me ragged. So it is a gift. It goes beyond self-care. It
Mm.
goes to a place of um, just tending to what wants to be a master. This monkey brain. I think you talk about that in your book as well. Recognize what's happening inside of myself so I can be more autonomous. I like that word. We don't use that word a whole lot on my podcast. At least we haven't to this point. So I appreciate that word.
Well, I use that word in particular because so many in healthcare feel that their autonomy has been taken from them. So healthcare has become big business in this country, and it's probably been that way for a while, but it's much more top down. It's much more corporate. 75% of physicians are now employees, as opposed to the days when, it was a mom and pop, shop, so to speak. And so the rallying cry is basically they have taken all of my autonomy. And that is a very unfortunate state to be in because, yes, so much external autonomy has been taken. By definition, when we're an employee, we've lost control over the conditions of our workplace. That's the employer that has that power, shall we say. And yet, that rallying cry leaves physicians in a state of what we might call learned helplessness. I can't do anything anyway. They have taken all my autonomy. And that is a very tragic state because while, yes, external autonomy has been wrested, it's the internal autonomy that we don't have to give up. That's the famous Viktor Frankl quote that, whatever happens to a man, obviously to a woman, there's that final freedom, that freedom to choose our way. And that's coming from somebody, who was in Auschwitz, it's beyond imaginable. And yet he remained clear about that other type of autonomy when so much, an unimaginable amount had been taken. So that's the word, and it's very intentional. And what we're talking about thoughts and becoming the master of the mind, really gets at the first way that I talk about in the book, the first of the 6 ways that mindfulness restores autonomy and cures burnout. And that is recognizing that you're not your thoughts. For Brian, the thoracic surgeon that I talked about, he never stopped to think if he was his thoughts, if his thoughts were true. He just believed them all. And many of us do. We don't learn that we don't have to believe all of our thoughts. Once we start paying attention to what's going on in the mind, we realize there's a lot of really wacky thoughts going on in there. Thoughts about ourselves, about others, about you name it. Crazy thoughts, worrying thoughts, fearful thoughts, ruminations, rehearsing, everything. A lot of it is just plain fake news. It's junk. And it's not until we sit quietly, that's the beauty of meditation. We begin to see this more clearly when we sit quietly and we simply observe what the mind is up to, not judging it, not thinking, oh, what's wrong with my mind? It's all of us. This is the human mind. Busy, busy, busy. Thousands, tens of thousands of thoughts a day. It's not until we become the observer that we begin to see it. And once we see it, again, there's autonomy there. Wow, I have a choice. I don't have to believe all these thoughts. How do you like that? And maybe a lot of them are really dragging me down because that's what most of us see when we pay attention. The negativity bias is taking us into so many dark alleys that are just extremely unhelpful for us.
And I like how you said it earlier, how it's terrible for the physicians and their own psyche, but it's also really not a good thing for our healthcare system. I mean, it's a balance. So people, everyday people suffer, and we rely a lot on the physical and mental well-being of our physicians.
Definitely.
We really do. We really do. And I like, if they're working with you, I think that's modeling the kind of behavior. They're learning a behavior that can be modeled by their patients, and hopefully the lesson. So it's really, I see it kind of as a, kind of the top of the funnel. You're helping these folks, and it will hopefully funnel through to all the rest of us who aren't physicians. And that is a gift that just keeps giving, because if a mom goes to see a physician and then she's able to be equipped with something that helps her kid who's going through something in middle school, because what kid is not in middle school going through something? So I love that so very much.
Well, let me
Um,
just remind your audience, if they want to get a taste of the book, they can download a free chapter at gailgazelle.com/mindful MD.
you want to read it. It's a very smooth read. It kept me engaged. I like the vignettes that you use, of course, those quotes, like I mentioned. But I felt, even though I'm not a physician, it related to me. And I think that that's important to mention. So whether you are a physician or you're not, or a physician in your life who might benefit from this, highly recommend. And it might even help all the rest of us be a little more compassionate. I think that's what it was for me. I have several um, folks in the medical field in my life, and it gave me a lot more compassion to what they're
Hmm.
going through. So, and their unique kind of brand of burnout, which I could only begin to imagine. So I appreciated that quite a bit. I'm wondering where your own journey to mindfulness began. I think you recently were at a John Kabat-Zinn retreat. I remember you talked about that. And I would love to hear some takeaways of that. But I'm wondering if you could kind of turn back time again and kind of tell us maybe where it began leading up to that.
Yeah. I think it was in my internship, so a number of years ago, where I stumbled upon a Thich Nhat Hanh book called Peace is Every Step. And I remember just kind of picking it up and thinking, oh, there's something in this. So this is decades ago. And that book really, I think, opened my eyes to so much about the inner workings of my own mind. And this idea that peace is every step, like it's kind of a funny title until you get it. But what it's really saying is that every moment of your life matters. And there are decisions that you make in every moment that contribute to peace or don't. Peace within yourself, peace in your close relationships, peace in, how you deal with a bank teller, peace with your children, and perhaps even peace within a society. It's really a very powerful concept, and it just spoke to me, it really resonated for me. So that began my mindfulness journey. I meditated off and on. I would tell myself that I wasn't good at meditation, which I now am so apt to tell people that this isn't about being good or bad, first of all. And also, a busy mind is great substrate for mindfulness. Many docs say to me, well, I tried meditating, but it's just another thing that I couldn't do. And they think that because their mind is so busy that they're somehow failing at meditation. But it's good stuff if your mind is busy. That gives you something to work on in meditation. So that began my journey. And then in 2013, when my first book came out, Mindfulness Support for Alzheimer's Caregivers, I took the John Kabat-Zinn mindfulness-based stress reduction course. And that was also incredibly wonderful. Then I took a lot more courses. I've sat many, many silent retreats. And between 2017 and 2019, I had the great pleasure of doing a 2-year mindfulness meditation teacher training with two wonderful individuals, Jack Cornfield and Tara Brach. So I would say all of those things take me to where I am now, doing none of it perfectly. My son would be the first to tell you that. And yet, being able to pause, being able to ask myself, well, is that thought helpful to me, or can I just let it kind of pass by like a cloud in the open sky? I can also ask myself, how do I want to be showing up? Who do I want to be today, right now, in these moments that are unfolding right now? How do I want to show up with my partner? It's our intimate relationships where we can be the most reactive. Do I want to be reactive, or what's my choice here? If I expect my partner to be kind to me and empathetic and not react to everything I say or do, well, then the onus is on me to show up the same way. So it's helped me be such a better person, such a better parent, such a better doctor, such a better coach, such a better educator. It's we can all show up at our best and contribute to peace. This is an election year. We got a lot of lack of peace in our society. What can I do? How can I interact with people who have different views? How can I be more compassionate? Because that's their lens. And if I want them to respect my lens, well, obviously I have to respect theirs. Be crazy to think that I'm just going to get them to believe what I believe when they fundamentally don't. So it's about showing up at our best and getting along in this massive sandbox that we live in America. How do we play with others? These are important questions.
To be peace. I might have to read that book
Mm.
again. I believe that I read that several years ago. I love anything Thich Nhat Hanh. Just what a peaceful soul. I think that's how I would describe him. Just um, completely still water. Whenever I would watch him on videos on YouTube, I just think, wow,
Mm.
that man does not have a feather to ruffle. He's just peace is in
Mhm.
it was in every little bit of his being. Such an inspiration. Even when I would just listen to him or read his books, there's something very calming about it. And I would highly encourage listeners to check out his work, because if you're struggling to claim peace in your life, to be peace, mm, he is such, he
Yes.
he is still. because of his work. Such an amazing model for that. Um, could you tell us a key takeaway of that 7-day retreat? I'm wondering if it's still fresh enough that there might be something that's kind of lingered.
The key takeaway for me, meditating, whether it's for 15 minutes or whether it's for 7 days, is that everything really passes. Now, that's an adage that we all hear as you're going through something difficult. Oh, everything passes, Gail. It'll be okay. Yet when we sit and meditate, we see that everything passes. We see that. So, recently it was a quiet weekend. My partner was away. I didn't have much to do. I think it was raining. And I started feeling the lonelies. Everybody can feel lonely, whether you're with people or not with people. It's part of the human condition. In the past, my mind would have really grabbed onto that. Oh, I'm so lonely. I don't have enough people in my life. Oh, this is a bad weekend. Oh, woe is me, or whatever. But now I could see that and just see it's just a transient state, Gail. It's going to pass. You don't have to get all invested in feeling lonely. Of course, that it's part, it's a normal emotion, but you don't have to get as drawn into it. And that for me is the biggest takeaway. And that's really one of the gifts of mindfulness. I don't have to get all entangled with whatever state arises within me. They're all going to pass, just like the clouds in the sky. And I love that metaphor. I include an open sky meditation in the book, Mindful MD, and I include it in the book, Everyday Resilience. Um, you just know in your bones it's going to pass. There's no reason to get as entangled, upset, drawn into, and that has to do with anger, sadness, worries that we have. You just really get it all passes. So why give it the benefit of all of that stress? There's just no reason.
And energy. That's something that came to me this past week was I love that investment. Do I want to invest the energy in this thing that's got me kind of inflamed?
Yes.
My
See it,
my
the choice, having the autonomy because you see the choice point. That's the key here.
Yes. My company, Good Aim Communications, recently moved offices, and I don't know if you've ever been through that, but it is an ordeal.
Mm.
Capital O. It's an
Mhm.
ordeal to move. And there have been a lot of things along the way that have gone great. And there have been a lot of things along the way that have been, woo, have really tempted me to become invested in frustration. And this
Yes.
past week, I realized how some things had been drawing me in.
Mm.
And I paused and had that thought just in the car because thoughts don't stop in the car. We all know that.
Yes.
And I thought, I do have a choice whether I let this ruffle my feathers and I give away, you know, some of these days are, the prime of my energy.
Mm.
Why give that away? Aren't there other things that would be a better
Yes.
use for that energy? And giving myself grace to say it doesn't mean that it's okay, but
Mhm.
it means I have the choice, that autonomy to step
Mhm.
away. That's just so lovely. That's so lovely. I'm wondering if you would tell us a little bit about your own mindfulness routine. I don't know if you have maybe a morning routine or midday or end of day, or maybe all three, anything that just has kind of stuck with you for a while. And I'm sure that's changed over the years. I know it has for me.
Mhm. Yeah, I have an imperfect mindfulness routine, like many people. It's very un-American to sit quietly and meditate, and we're all being pulled by our devices and everything else, a million responsibilities. But I try to meditate every morning, 15, 20 minutes. That's what I do. That works for me. I can convince myself that I do have the time to do it. Could I meditate longer? Sure, but I don't. That's what I do. And I try to do that as many days as possible. I also take purposeful pauses. So again, coming back to intimate relationships, if I'm having, some sort of heated discussion with my partner or with my son, really try to pause. I notice my own emotional temperature. I kind of take it. I rate it on a 0 to 10 scale so I can kind of see for myself, where am I? And I take those slow, deep breaths. that purposeful pause that, again, I talk about in the Mindful MD book, that downshifts my nervous system so that I can say something that I'm not going to later regret. I can contribute to peace in those moments for myself, for this other person in our relationship. I can strengthen the relationship rather than do or say something that actually erodes it. So that's a big part of my mindfulness practice as well. And that place of just connecting with myself, observing what's going on within me, observing my thoughts, and reminding myself that I don't have to engage with them in the same way.
I think it would be wonderful if we could normalize what you just said. When we
Mm.
notice, when we're in touch with ourselves enough that we notice that we are activated, rating it. And maybe if it's over a certain amount, there might need
Mhm.
to be some breaths to bring it down. And if we notice that that doesn't do the trick, we just need a break before we come back to it. And that maybe normalizing that that is love, that is awareness,
Mm.
and prioritizing the relationship.
Yes.
I like that. So some skills around that would be pretty great to build. I like that. Would you tell us, you mentioned the sky as a practice that you like quite a bit, and you've included that in a couple of your books. Is that one of your favorite mindfulness practices, or is there another that maybe you might want to lead me and the guests or the listeners in?
There are quite a few, but why don't we try that one out?
Okay,
Do you want me to lead that right now?
that would be fantastic.
For about how many minutes, Amy?
Hmm, 2 minutes. How about 2 minutes? Is that long enough?
Yeah, I'll do my best.
All right.
So people can just sit quietly as long as you're stationary. Allow your eyes to gently close and just take some nice, slow, deep breaths, almost giving yourself permission to step away from whatever you're doing today and just taking a little bit of time out to nourish yourself. And as you're sitting here, there may be thoughts that arise in your mind, and that's okay. It's the mind's job to produce thought. Nothing wrong with that. At the same time, I invite you to imagine a beautiful blue, clear sky on a lovely sunny day. Just bring that into the mind's eye and imagine that there are clouds coming through that open sky, arising, passing through, and disappearing. And imagine now that the next thought that comes into your mind is like one of those clouds. And your mind is that big, beautiful blue open sky. Imagine that thought arising just as a cloud arises. Imagine the thought passing through, high above you, in a sense, and imagining that that thought then dissipates and is no more. And just like the clouds in the sky, it's a gentle, easy, natural process. Thoughts are just like the clouds in the sky. They arise, they pass through, then they're gone. Every thought you've ever had follows that same exact pattern. And sitting here now, as more thoughts arise in the mind, as they will, just allowing them to be like the clouds, arising, passing through, disappearing. And just as some clouds are light and fluffy and airy, there are storm clouds as well. And so when there's a thought that's more stormy, more troubling, you can also imagine it being like a storm cloud that arises, passes through the open sky, and then is no more. So I encourage you, as you're listening to this, to try this out for longer periods of time. Imagine that beautiful blue sky. That's the mind. A beautiful open space for each and every one of us. And we can develop the ability to allow our thoughts to pass through the open sky of our minds so that we can live with much more peace and much more ease. And now, at the end of this meditation, you can stretch a little bit and gently open your eyes.
Thank you for leading us in that. I did notice a few storm clouds come through.
They do for all of us. And this is the way that we can work with our own mind and reclaim that autonomy over ourselves and our minds so that we can live with freedom and we can live without burnout, whether we're in healthcare or not.
We've talked at length about physician burnout. And I'm sure there's a lot that we can attribute to COVID and the finances and just the physical and mental demands of what has happened to our physician population over the last several years. I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about this bridge between this relationship between burnout and resilience and what we can do to help become more resilient.
Hmm. Well, in my earlier book, Everyday Resilience, which is actually being republished in January as under the title How to Be Resilient. So we'll have to have a second session about that. I talk about the fact that we all have resilience within us. It's easy to think about elite athletes or, Superman and Wonder Woman as, they have resilience and I don't, but we all have resilience within us. And I see resilience as a deep well of resources that reside within each of us, resources like courage, strength, and fortitude, and curiosity, and love, and goodness, and compassion, creativity, community. For many of us, however, that well of resilience gets paved over by life experience. For me, abuse, medical school, etc. But we all have things that can make it difficult for us to access our well of resilience. So part of being resilient is recognizing that you're capable of it, that you have it within you, and learning to draw from this inner well of resources. So what does that mean? Well, part of it, let's say you're going through something difficult today. I'm sure many of your listeners are. It's part of life. You can feel like it's insurmountable. How am I going to get through this? Whatever, though, let's imagine it's an illness in yourself or a loved one, a new diagnosis. And it's really scary. And you don't know, how am I going to manage this? Do I have what it takes? What's this going to be like for me? And when you remind yourself of that inner well of resilience, you can remind yourself that you have drawn from it in the past. You've gotten through difficult things in the past. We all have, small and or large. So you can reconnect. Wow, I did get through that by hook or by crook. It wasn't easy and it was far from perfect, but here I am standing on the other side. I can get through difficult things. That's connecting with your inner well of resilience, which can help support you in getting through whatever you're facing today. It's a resource that you can draw upon. So resilience is within each and every one of us. It is. We're born with it and it's there. We have to kind of use that autonomy to reclaim it.
That's helpful to think about. I love the visual of a well of resilience. And I
Very,
assume, I'm sorry, what?
a very deep well.
And I like the idea of mindfulness kind of being a path back to that, or a kind of a cleaning rag to kind of move the gunk away so we can access what is within us. We are fantastic beings. We just have to remember it. I saw a quote on your website that caught my attention. It said, "There has never been a more difficult time to be in medicine." And I'm wondering if there's anything else beyond what we've talked about before that you think makes that true right now. And we talked about I would add one thing. We've talked about finances and kind of corporate structures, how things are different now, not mom and pa. There's also this aspect too, I know, of just the insane amount of debt that physicians have kind of hanging over their heads when they come out too. But maybe there are other parts that feel that make it so now is so
Mm.
difficult.
I think it's very multifactorial, but we're just trained as physicians that we're the top of the chain of command. And it's really a lot of dissonance that we're employed and that we don't control the conditions. So I think really the biggest take home is focus on what you can control, exert less emotional energy on the things that you can't, use mindfulness strategies to help you with that. And that is a big part of the recipe for thriving. So, Amy, such a pleasure discussing all of this with you today.
It is. I appreciate your time today, Gail. Um, is there anything you would like to promote as we draw to a close here? Let's talk about that book. So this is, if you're online, here's what it looks like. You can see I've tabbed some things that are quite fantastic. I'm sure you will too.
So again, people can download the free chapter at gailgazelle.com/mindfulmd. On my site as well, we offer free consultations for any healthcare professionals, nursing, physician, who would like to learn more about coaching, to actually find out what this is about and get some help wherever you are. So you can go to my site on the homepage, you can click on the free consultation, and we're really here to help as many healthcare professionals restore their autonomy and have long, productive, really joyful careers.
Thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Gazelle. Um, I will let us go here with a parting blessing as we wrap up. From my heart to yours, may you live with ease. This is your host, Amy Morgan, signing off. Today's podcast is sponsored by Good Aim Communications, a digital marketing firm based in Indianapolis. To learn more, visit goodaimcommunications.com.